It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life, from the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators, the famous and not so famous, the controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here's Douglas Coleman.
Hello there, heidi ho there, welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show. It's me, as always, Douglas Coleman. How are you? We got 3 guests on today. We don't do that too often, but it's always a good show when we do, and I've got 3 good guests lined up. The first 2 are Scorgie and Jhod Cardinal. They are involved with the new film about Danny Trejo called Inmate Number 1. The Rise of Danny Trejo. It's a featured documentary experience revealing his extraordinary life journey. I've always been a big fan of Danny Trejo. I think if anybody is not familiar with his life story, watch this film and you will be blown away at how incredible this guy is and what he has done and gone through in his life and where he is at now in his life. It's an amazing transformation. From facing execution to Hollywood movie star. Not everybody can put that on their resume. They will be up first, followed by Braendlein. Barbara is an author and a mother of 4 children who have mitochondrial disease. And she will explain what that's all about. She'll also talk about her new book called Olive, which is available now on Amazon. Just a quick update, our video studio is coming along nicely. We've got the set up, and now we are practicing camera angles and different shots and getting the lighting right, and we'll probably do a dress rehearsal, if there is such a thing on a talk show. Yeah, I think so. We'll do that probably next week, and then we'll take a look at, we've been getting some good responses from people who want to be on the show, and sorry we haven't replied just yet, but we're putting everybody who is submitting for the video show into a folder, and once we get the studio and all the bugs and everything out and it's ready to rock and roll, then we will go through the submissions and we will contact you. So we will be right back with Scorgie and Jhod Cardinal.
The show's about to start!
I'm coming as fast as I can.
And now...
Hey, Rocky, watch me pull a rabbit out of my hat.
Again?
Nothing up my sleeve. Presto! Ooh, don't know my own strength.
Now here's something we hope you'll really like.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Scorgie and Jhod Cardinal. Hey guys, how are you?
Doing good. Thanks for having us.
Great. Thank you very much, Douglas.
Thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it. I'm reading through your bios here, and I know you got a film you want to promote. It's called Inmate 1, The Rise of Danny Trejo. You guys are the second people that I've interviewed about a film that had Danny Trejo in it, although the other film he wasn't the feature. He just sort of happened to be in the film. But the one before this was a film made by a guy named Matt Best. Do you know who he is?
No. What was the film?
The film was called Range 15. It was kind of like a comedy, kind of a spoof on military life. A lot of toilet and sex humor, but it was very funny. William Shatner was in it, and Danny Trejo was in it. Ron Jeremy was in it. And Matt Best runs a production company, and he also runs Black Rifle Coffee he owns, which is an all-military...
Oh, I know Black Rifle.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah, I know Black Rifle Coffee, yeah.
He's the owner and CEO of that, and real nice guy. Danny Trejo is coming through the show on 2 different films now, but I've never actually interviewed the guy. Would like to. Hey, if you talk to him, tell him I would love to have him on the show.
We'll put in the word after this.
Okay. So let me start with you, Adam. And reading through your bio, lot of stuff on marijuana. Was that Canada legalized marijuana? How long ago was that?
Oh, I think it's 2 years ago now, and actually the two marijuana films that you're looking up in our bio actually played a small part in that. Both were invited to Parliament Hill by the Liberal Party to help educate politicians and senators on the flaws of the drug law, and particularly in connection to cannabis. So, and then the Liberal Party is who legalized it here federally in Canada 2 years ago. So both of those films were kind of the little engines that they were just, three guys in a basement suite that slugged it away on the first one, and it became this international cult classic in the marijuana community. And then they demanded a second one called The Culture High, and then that's where Jhod and I connected, and Jhod landed that deal that was right before Netflix had announced they were going worldwide, and that was one of the first documentaries that landed a worldwide Netflix deal, or an international Netflix deal.
So the first one was called The Union. Was that a documentary
Correct.
On marijuana?
Yeah, The Union, The Business Behind Getting High was a feature doc, and it really looked how the marijuana industry profits while remaining illegal, particularly looking at the BC industry at the time, which was a $1 billion industry rivaling, the most profitable ones in the province, all while maintaining, that it was an underground market and the money was illegally getting funneled into various businesses all around the province. And then looking at how these laws came into place in the first place. And The Culture Eye really looks at a much more global perspective of how things are changing around the world and how drug policy was heavily influenced by the United States, way back in the day.
I don't know if it's been changed now or not, but marijuana used to be classified in the same class of drug as LSD and heroin, which is insane.
Still is.
It's still
a Schedule 1 narcotic. Yeah, there's been many attempts to move it, and it hasn't been moved. And where people are always, like us as filmmakers, we are always fascinated to find out that actually, like, cocaine is a Schedule 2, but cannabis is a Schedule 1, right? That, how is cocaine considered less addictive and less harmful than cannabis? So, but you're definitely seeing that, the wool has been pulled away from everybody's eyes, and that is definitely shifting globally. And now, I mean, if you look at, I think, 50 or 5 out of every 10 people I talk to now is using some sort of cannabis, whether it's a CBD ointment or tincture or cream. They're finally realizing that there's been a ton of medical benefits that have been kind of stifled for years, and now that's constantly changing, and you see it happening in the states, state by state by state, and probably eventually the federal law will change.
Well, usually how it works in the United States is once a majority of states have the law, then the Supreme Court usually rules and kicks the rest of them in. That's how they did it with gay marriage. Once they got to 26 states that legalized it, then the Supreme Court ruled and said, okay, the rest of you got to follow suit.
Yeah. That's what I think is. I think they're getting close now. I think that's going to happen within our lifetime here.
I don't remember how many states there are that it's legal. Last count, I thought it was about 13 or 14. But that could be going.
That's what I thought too. Yeah, that could be. There could have been a few new ones, but that's the last I thought was around there.
So in Canada, it's legal completely nationally, right? How is that run? Are they private weed stores, or are they government-run weed stores?
All government. That's the one downside, and as entrepreneurs will look at in Canada, is that in Canada they are all run by the federal government.
Actually, Adam, it depends the province.
Oh, that's right, province to province. So same as because actually Alberta's got some private ones. Ontario's completely provincial. BC, right, Jhod, is run by BC Liquor, and then
no, it's both. There's both private and government. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because Alberta has Plant Life and Flower and Flame, which are privately owned. That's right.
Okay, so did the price come way down once it became legal?
No.
Did price come down? No, price is actually higher. So the underground market is still surviving. Because also, you had a lot of people in the business get in that don't really care about cannabis and the product. They were just businessmen looking to make big money. So you had a lot of the big giant corporations get in, and they were making really, to be honest, crappy product and overinflating their stock and there's some partners that made a lot of money, but now you're starting to see a lot of these micro grows, almost like microbreweries with beer, that are making a superior product that, people prefer.
It doesn't make any sense to me that the government wouldn't seize the opportunity to legalize marijuana and tax it 100%, 200%. Imagine the revenue that the government could be pulling in. Do you have any idea what the Canadian government took the first year that marijuana was legal?
No, I know. I only know the numbers of when we did the doc of what the illegal industry was, and is that, they were saying there was upwards of $12 billion just for the province, and they, no economist would even challenge it because they thought it might have even been more. There was one economist that we interviewed that wanted it challenged. He's like, this is just an estimate. I want to be challenged so we can go get funding to get more. And everybody said, we think that's a low estimate. So you'd think if the government got their ducks in a row and organized things, they'd be making a hefty profit. So I'm sure they're doing well, but not as well, because also with government, the only thing any of them seem to be good at is collecting taxes and mismanaging money. So I don't think they're doing the greatest job of it either.
Colorado was one of the first states to legalize weed, and I remember it was last year or the year before that the governor came out and said, we have a huge budget surplus and we don't know what we should do with the money. They were thinking of canceling the state income tax.
Well, they put a lot of money towards school and education and rehabilitation. They put it to a lot of good uses, and they were really a foot model for a lot of the other states coming in, and that's ultimately, unfortunately, for better or worse, that's usually the tipping point for everybody, is the financial incentive, versus that it can actually help people. And there's actually studies that show that opioid use significantly dropped in places where cannabis was a legal alternative for pain treatment. A lot of alcohol consumption went down and stuff like that. So there's usually, but the deciding factor normally for a state to fully go is the profit. That's usually what gets them most excited.
Well, yeah, that's true. The other thing about marijuana, I haven't smoked it in many years. I did when I was in high school and college, but I haven't, really done it for a long time. But the one thing that I remembered about it was that when people smoked it, they just got very passive and very mellow and shy. People get nasty and angry and violent when they drink, or can. But I've never seen anybody smoke a joint and get violent,
Well, that was one of the things that I noticed, because actually our first film, The Union, I inherited a nightclub when I was 23 when my father passed. And then when I went to these huge, marijuana, protests or, hemp fest and stuff like that, and there's thousands of people, I was blown away at how little altercations or lack of completely there were. Whereas when we had 200 people in the bar, we almost had a fight every night.
Oh, yeah.
Right? There's definitely, now not to say there has been studies, obviously, people with, underlying mental conditions and stuff like that. Anytime you are, consuming something that affects your mental or cognitive function, you can get, adverse reactions. So you are getting some people that have, suffer from schizophrenia or bipolar and stuff like that, that if they smoke marijuana, it can really kind of send them in a downward spiral and make them more schizophrenic. So you definitely can have adverse effects, but generally, it was something we noticed and mentioned in the doc, is how there'd be thousands of people protesting, smoking copious amounts of cannabis, and really no violence or any kind of altercations, which is very different to, I worked in nightclubs for years, very different to what we dealt with in nightclubs on a regular basis.
Well, it seems to me that if the U.S. government legalized it nationally, taxed it at 100 or 200%, they could probably pay for the national health for everybody.
Well, see, now that's what Canada does, is we have what's called the sin tax. So we put that on alcohol, cigarettes, and now cannabis, that is what helps pay for our socialized health care.
Right. Well, that's
so.
That's how it should
be. They kind of figure this is a freedom. We allow you to do it, but we know it is a drain or can be a drain on the health system, and therefore, we are going to tax it heavily for those that might have to come through the healthcare system down the road because of it.
Well, it makes sense. I mean, the people who smoke and drink will probably be more likely to be in the hospital. Where when they start talking about socialized medicine in the United States and they want to raise people's income tax, the people get pissed off. Because they say, look, I got private insurance. Why do I have to pay for this guy? But if they do it on marijuana and cigarettes and things, you can justify it that way.
Yeah.
So I think it makes a lot more sense. But let's move on from weed. And let's see. You did another film called Ice Guardians?
Yeah.
Examining the enforcer role in NHL. Canadians and hockey, they're synonymous, yeah?
Yeah.
Why is that?
Yep.
What is it with Canadians and hockey? I mean, I've met people, I spent some time in Toronto and met old ladies, young guys, and everything. Hockey, that's it, What is it with hockey in Canada? Why is that?
Yeah, I think, it's just ingrained in our culture up here. And I think something, being a hockey parent myself, my daughter plays competitive hockey, and that's where we're off to here in like 20 minutes, is that she, something that I think hockey does that other sports don't, from a parent perspective and a viewer's perspective, is that you go to a lot of these small towns that really have nothing else other than an arena and a tournament. And then, unlike, say, football or baseball, where we spread out, like a lot of times you're in these cold arenas, so you kind of get to know the parents better than maybe other sports teams, because you're almost huddled up next to them sometimes because you're cold and you travel to these remote towns. And, there's something really interesting about watching your kid develop in that sport, because on ice, every little thing that they do, you're kind of like, oh, wow, they can pivot now. Oh, wow, they can skate backwards. Oh, wow, they can stick handle while they're skating. Whereas other sports, you don't go, oh, my kid can run to the base. Like you can run when you're 3, right? Or my kid can sprint really fast. Like, you see the progression in hockey kind of different than any other sport, because you're on a foreign surface, right? And then the parents are meant to be in these cold arenas, and you have your warm coffee, and there's a real family atmosphere. That's why, when that Broncos incident happened here and all those young players died, that tragedy up here, you saw it kind of connect on a global scale that, not to say other sports wouldn't, but a lot of hockey parents really, because we've all been there. When your kid starts playing competitive hockey, they travel on buses. And sometimes the parents go on there too, because, if the town's 2 hours away, you don't feel like driving 2 hours there, watching the game, and driving 2 hours back. You're like, oh, I'll just sit on the bus with the kids and watch a movie and put on my headphones. So I think that's kind of, that combined with the history of hockey in Canada, that we claim it as our own, even though, we played a part in creating basketball too. Hockey is definitely ingrained in Canadian culture.
Did you see the movie Goalie?
I did not, but actually Jhod knows about it, because I think Jhod was close to representing that film.
Oh, okay. Because
a partner of mine that I work with on other films, he actually reps it in the U.S., so it's Dark Star Pictures.
Right. Okay. Yeah, because I get a lot of them through Dark Star, or coming through Dark Star Pictures, and I interviewed the star and co-star and the writer-director, all Canadians too. Great film if you get a chance to see it. Really good.
Yeah, it is great.
Did you? Oh, you saw it? Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's. I just love it whenever they cover something historical like that in the Canadian hockey space. Adam and I, as you notice, we have quite a few sport docs, and that's kind of where we sit most of the time. Danny's a little bit outside of that, but it was nice to see that film, and good for those guys. They did well in Canada and the U.S.
Well, it was a great film. I really enjoyed it, and I didn't know that much about Terry Sawchuk. What was amazing to me watching that as a historical piece was the lack of protective gear that those guys wore back in those days. And even the goalie pads made of leather. One of the points that came up in the interview was that the goalie pads, because they were leather, they would soak up water. So at the beginning of the game, they were much lighter than they were at the end of the game, after these guys were tired and their legs just got heavier and heavier as the game went on. And then, completely devoid of any masks or helmets. Pretty brutal.
That's unreal. I don't know if I'd ever get in front of a puck without a mask, that's for sure. It's crazy.
I wouldn't get in front of there with gear.
Yeah.
We of course, Jhod and I produced a documentary on Grant Fuhrer, the first black player to be inducted into the Hall of Fame and one of the greatest goaltenders of all time. And And Grant even said he was hired as a consultant on the one movie with the Wayans brothers where he went in the net. It was like Senseless or something like that. And Grant was like, man, you have no idea how hard this is when you haven't like trained it. And the guy was like, no, like really hammer a few pucks at me. And after the first one, hit him in the chest, even the pads, he's like, oh, I'm out. No more. Like he was like, I had no idea how bad that hurts, right? Like, of course you get numb to it after a while and you get used to it, but he had some NHLers like slamming pucks at him, and he, after the first one hit him kind of in between the pads, he thought he was dying. He's like, I'm done. Get me out of these pads.
I wouldn't get out there. I can't skate anyways, so that would not be a good sport for me, I think.
No, it's a difficult one.
Yeah, but I really respect those guys because it is a real, I hate to use the term manly, but it really is. I mean, it's full contact, and I don't even think that's necessarily part of the way that the game is supposed to be played. I mean, you're supposed to beat the shit out of each other. Is that part of it? Because it happens in every game.
Well, so we go. Well, the fighting it's gone down every year, and probably in the next couple of years it will be completely eliminated. But what we really showed in Ice Guardians is how the enforcer role was born naturally out of, and it's kind of a human behavioral aspect that it came because the game was, as I mentioned earlier, it's on a foreign ice surface with razor blades on your feet, and you're surrounded by boards, and you hammer each other into the boards. So the physical element was always there. But the problem is that, because the game is so fast, the refs, even now with video replay and everything, they miss a lot of the things that happen. So a lot of players really got sick and tired of other players taking advantage of them, or favoritism, like you see in the NBA and everything else. Certain guys foul way more, other guys don't because they're a superstar and they bring money to the league. So a lot of guys were getting sick of getting hacked or chopped or little things that cause pretty serious injuries that can often go unnoticed. So a lot of guys started just protecting themselves and their teammates because these are the guys that, they travel with, they go on the road with. This is family to them. A lot of them are groomsmen at each other's weddings and, godfathers to their children. So when they see their best friend and teammate getting taken advantage of, a lot of guys that just had the instinct of being a protector were like, I'm not going to let that happen. So then the enforcer role kind of grew naturally. They were originally called policemen, and then they became enforcers, and then the arms race of that kind of started, that when one team would have an enforcer, then another team's like, well, we need somebody to deal with him. And then teams would stack up on toughness and stuff like that, because in the playoffs and, you had the Broad Street Bullies and you had teams that would rule by intimidation and physicality. Other teams armored up in order to not get pushed around. And that's kind of, and then as the rules changed and things evolved, the way the enforcers ruled and the way that they worked slowly evolved, but now they're constantly putting in changes to kind of eliminate fighting, and it probably will be gone. And then maybe they can address the real issues of hockey, because kind of what our documentary, one of the parts that went into, is that the fighting is really the scapegoat for all the concussion problems and injuries. They're always like, oh, well, that's, if you get rid of that, that's all the problem. But the concussions from fighting is less than 10%. The real problem is now the game is so fast, guys can move 35, 40 miles an hour on skates, and they have armor on, and they're allowed to body check you, right? Like that's almost like getting hit by a small car, right? And even if you don't have direct contact to the head, you can cause serious concussions and injuries. And that's what's constantly happening. A lot of guys that have these traumatic concussions, it was an incidental hit. They turned and they had their head down and they bumped in even sometimes their own teammates, right? But because speeds have now increased so much. And the biggest indicator of this is if you look at female hockey has no fighting and no concussions, yet they're the second highest NCAA sport for, or no fighting and no body checks, yet they have the second highest amount of concussions in all NCAA sports, right below football.
Honestly, I've never ever seen a female ice hockey match.
It's a great game. My daughter plays. It's a different game because the women, because of physicality, they just don't have the strength to shoot like the boys. They don't have the wrist size and stuff, so a lot of times their shot strength isn't as strong, so it's a more of a puck possession game, and they have to get in closer to but the skating speeds now with the training, I mean, they had Kendall Coyne come out for one of the All-Star games, and she was a second off the fastest guy in the world, and she beat 12 NHL All-Stars. Wow. Phenomenal. So the girls have really come a long way in their game, and they're starting to get a more professional league as they get fans, but it's a different game, but it's still a very exciting game. Very fast, still very physical. When I say no body checking and then you come to a girls' game, you're like, that's not considered body checking? I'm like, no, that's considered rubbing out.
Let's talk about Inmate number 1. Is it Inmate number 1 or just Inmate 1?
No, Inmate number 1 or 1, The Rise of Danny Trejo. Correct.
Okay. So this film is it out yet or is it still in post?
Well, it's out on Super Channel in Canada, but it will be releasing internationally on June 22nd, and then July 7th it'll be available pretty much on all VOD platforms in the U.S.
Super. So this is basically his life story?
Correct.
How did you get involved with this?
Well, Jhod and I are producers, but the writer, director, editor, cinematographer is Brett Harvey, or as we appropriately named Brettley Kubrick, because the guy does everything for his docs. Like if you really credited everything he does, he color corrects them, he edits them, he writes them, he shoots them. He's the DOP of one of the cameras. He's the director. He is phenomenal at what he does. But it's a team effort. So Brett does a lot of the heavy lifting, and Jhod and I are the ones that really handle on the sales, particularly Jhod when it comes to the sales and landing the monster deal we did with Universal.
So, in a nutshell, Danny Trejo was basically a bad kid that went good at some point after spending time in prison. Is that correct?
Danny, that's putting it lightly. Danny was, he was facing execution in the gas chambers in Soledad prison for intentionally inciting a riot. But he was really on the wrong path. And Danny kind of discovered it in the doc of why he went down that path, and it was because, he grew up, in the generation where the father worked hard, and when he came home, kids were to be seen and not heard. And, I provide for this family and don't ask for anything else. Like, that's my job as a father. I provide, and so Danny really migrated to his uncle Gilbert, who was a very well-known gangster in Pacoima. In fact, in Heat, they named Danny Trejo's character after his uncle Gilbert because the director knew who Gilbert Trejo was. And then that's where Danny started doing armed robberies and heroin when he was 12, 13 years old.
Wow.
And went down that. He was in and out of juvie so much, before he was 18, that, like, he jokes in the film, he's like, that's where all my friends were. He's like, I just thought Mexicans were supposed to go to juvie because that's where we all hung out.
And now he's a big-time actor. How long has he been acting?
So he didn't even start acting till like 15 years after he got out of prison, and he was almost it was in his 40s that he started acting. And it all came, like you see in the trailer that he talks about, from helping others. He truly believes and lives by the life that everything good that has happened to him is a direct result of helping somebody else. And that all started when a sponsor that he agreed to help, because he was a very well-known drug counselor, he's been sober for 53 years now, called him and said, Danny, there's all this cocaine around, I think I'm going to slip. And Danny jumped out of bed at midnight and said, I'll be right there. What's the address? And Danny had no idea where it was. And he walked in. It was the movie set of Runaway Train. And as he walked in, as soon as he walked in, that face and that character got attention. And somebody came over and was like, hey, like, could you be an extra? Danny's like, an extra what? I'm like, well, an extra in a movie. He's like, well, what do you need me to do? They're like, we need you to look like a convict. And he's like, I can do that. And then they said, well, how much are they going to pay? And they're like, $30. He's like, no problem. He's like, these blues, they fit just right on me. And then he said as soon as he went out and did like the first filming scene, after, helping and working with a sponsor, then the assistant director, Eddie Bunker, who was a criminal in his early life and then a very established film writer and director, came up and said, hey, I watched you fight in San Quentin prison. You're Danny Trejo, right? You're the welterweight champ of San Quentin. And Danny's like, I am. And he's like, well, listen, we actually need someone to box and train our actor, Eric Roberts. Danny had no idea who Eric Roberts was. And was like, well, sure. He's like, how bad do you need him beat up? They're like, no, we don't. This is an actor. He's gentle. You just got to train him. And Danny's like, oh, you want him to beat me up? Sure, no problem. Like, give him a stick if you have to. And then they're like, well, but he's like, Danny goes, but hold on. He's like, they just offered me $30 a day to do this extra stuff. And they're like, we'll pay you $300 a day. Danny's like, $300 a day? Oh, man, shit, this guy can beat me up, kick me. He's like, I used to get beat up for free, Holmes. So then that's where he started his movie career, all because he went to help a sponsor and got recognized by Eddie Bunker and the team. And one thing led to another, and now he's arguably the most successful Mexican-American actor in Hollywood history, with over 404 movie credits and TV credits to his name, according to IMDb as of today.
Yeah, he's amazing. I always like watching films that he's in. He's so natural. I'm trying to think of this one that I just watched, and I cannot for the life of me remember the title of the film. All I remember is that he falls in love with this girl, and he wears this terrible powder blue tuxedo and brings her flowers. That's the only part of the scene I can remember.
Is that Sherry Baby?
Yeah.
Is that it?
Sounds like Sherry Baby.
Okay.
Is Maggie Gyllenhaal in it?
You know what? I'm just drawing a blank. I just have that picture of him wearing that bad tuxedo and holding the flowers and looking kind of pathetic at the door, but it was funny.
Doing more comedies now.
Yeah, he was very funny
than early in his career.
So what was your takeaway after meeting him?
Danny is quite literally one of the most inspiring transformations of human character that I've ever seen. If you had ever seen somebody that, if you were to write in a dramatic script that somebody was facing execution could turn his life around and become one of the most successful Mexican-American actors in Hollywood history, you'd say that can't be done. But he did. And he lived up to the promise that he made to God when he was facing execution, that he's like, God, if you let me die with dignity, I promise I will get back to my fellow man and turn my life around. And he's done that every step of the way for 54 years that he's been sober, always giving back. And as I mentioned in other interviews, there's celebrities who do charity and charity functions. Danny is truly about giving back. It isn't about getting the tax write-off or saying you do charity for him. He jokes that he's like, I've talked to God recently, and he says, Danny, you're almost there. The heaven gates are almost there. You got to do a little bit more work. Keep giving back. So he truly, truly is an inspirational man that makes you want to live a better life.
Well, he's also genuine, and he's also been there. He's also done that. If he goes and talks to kids who might be on the edge of becoming bad kids, they would listen to him.
You're exactly right, and
yeah.
That's what he always talks about, that he's like, my past sins, let me do the hard work so that you don't have to, has been a gift, because he's like, the hardest thing to reach youth is to get their attention. Right? He's like, but now that people recognize me from movies, I'm able to get their attention.
Oh,
he's
yeah.
like, in the heart. And then the second thing is when I'm talking to inmates or, people in prison, he's like, the hardest thing with them is that, you have to get their respect. But Danny serving, over 10 years in federal penitentiaries all over California, he instantly has their respect because he's lived it. And a lot of people still know him even from his prison reputation, because he used to run protection rings and was really, really known as a bad dude when he was in prison. Like, you don't mess with him. So he's like, when I walk into a room, whether it's inmates or young kids or whoever, I instantly have their respect and I instantly have their attention. So I'm able to actually make an impact and try to give them at least one day to try to get their life on the right path.
Oh, yeah. Well, he does sound like a truly inspirational guy. And the film is called Inmate #1, The Rise of Danny Trejo. Again, it's going to be out when?
It will be releasing, Joe, do you know these dates even better than me? So.
Yeah, July 7th in the U.S. on all major platforms through Universal Pictures. And then internationally a couple of weeks earlier on June 22nd. And that rolls out on various ways outside of the U.S.
Okay, super. Guys, we got to wrap this up. Thanks so much for coming on. Great talking to you. And I look forward to the film coming out. I'm definitely going to watch this
Thanks
one.
for having us.
Thanks so much, Douglas. Take care.
You're listening to Mr. Smooth and Savvy right here on the Douglas Coleman Show. We'll be right back after these commercial messages.
Hi there, this is Stuart Epps, record producer. This is my story about Elton John, working with him in those early years, going back to 1967 at Dick James, all the amazing tours, those first recordings, going through to Rocket Records, and it's an amazing story about his incredible rise to stardom and my part in that. So look forward to taking you on that journey. So here we go. Yeah, and to order this great audio CD, please just email me at stuartepps@talk21.com. That's Stuart, Stuart, Epps, EPPS, at talk, TALK, 21 in figures.com. Stuart Epps at talk21.com. Email me and I'll give you all the details for buying this brilliant audio disc. Thank you. Bye.
DJC Music and DJC Productions are pleased to announce a brand new website. We have started a listing website for radio show hosts as well as potential show guests. This is a meeting site where hosts and guests can come together. Show hosts can list their show and types of guests they're interested in booking. Potential guests can list their talents, bio, accomplishments, or anything they feel makes them an interesting radio show guest. There are no recurrent payments, only a one-time $5 listing fee. Your listing will stay up until you decide to cancel. Previous guests of The Douglas Coleman Show are welcome to submit their guest listing free of charge. Go to radiohostsandguests.com. That's radiohostsandguests.com.
Tired of living in a culture of lies, fake news, and alternative facts? The Pro-Truth Pledge reverses the tide of lies by calling on politicians, and everyone else, to commit to truth-oriented behaviors. The pledge asks signees to commit to 12 behaviors that research in behavioral science shows lead to truthfulness, such as clarifying one's opinions and the facts, citing one's sources, and celebrating people who update their beliefs toward the truth. Private citizens who sign the pledge get the benefit of contributing to a more truth-oriented society. Public figures get more substantive rewards for signing the pledge in the form of positive media and public recognition. The pledge crowdsources the truth by asking volunteers to evaluate the statements of public figures who sign the pledge. Take the pledge, demand that your elected representatives do so, and encourage your friends to take it at protruthpledge.org.
Acclaimed author of Garden, Jane Yates brings you the first book in a new trilogy, Octopus Pirate, a story of a foundling who has unusual talents, such as the ability to communicate with octopuses. As a baby, he was washed up on an island off the Scottish mainland. An eccentric former nun who lives alone with cats brings him up. He joins a circus and narrowly escapes plots against him, flees to Cornwall, builds a replica pirate ship that's also an airship to travel back in time to fight real pirates. Get your copy today from Amazon, only 99 cents.
Are you an independent musician? How would you like to have your songs played on hundreds of radio stations just like the one you're listening to right now? Join MusicSubmit.com and we'll promote your music to radio stations and blogs in your genre. It's free to set up your account, and we guarantee your music will be considered for airplay by radio stations worldwide. Why not sign up today? It's free. MusicSubmit.com. Radio promotion for indie musicians.
Hi, this is John Morgan, production supervisor for DJC Productions. And you're listening to The Douglas Coleman Show.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Barbara Braendlein. Hey, Barbara, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for coming on this show. My producer booked you, and he said the one reason that he booked you was because you mentioned something about liking good conversation. Have you listened to our show before?
I have.
Do you remember
I looked at your...
which episode?
You know, I don't have the number off the top of my head. You were introducing a new band, and I liked the sound of just the way, I like the way you talk.
Oh, well, thank you.
I thought you seemed like someone I would enjoy talking to.
Well, introducing a new band doesn't narrow it down. We've had lots of new bands on the show. But I appreciate you listening.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. I appreciate you listening to the show. That's very nice. Thank you. So you are an author, and I was intrigued you're a mother. I'm not intrigued that you're a mother. I'm intrigued that you were a mother and that you homeschool your children. I found that very interesting. Why did you decide to homeschool your children?
My book is telling the story of a nonverbal, medically fragile girl, and I based it off of our real life experiences with my own kids. They each have to varying degrees, a mitochondrial disease. And so the reason that we decided to homeschool initially had a lot to do with just their health, their ability to be in a classroom and not get sick. But it turned into, as we kept doing it, I have 4 kids, and we homeschooled them all. And what started out of necessity, because it's difficult to send 2 feeding tubes to a classroom, grew into a very individualized learning experience. I had the tremendously good fortune of having people around me who said, yeah, you can do this. There's a way to teach, reading to someone that can't talk. There's a way to go about every normal educational thing at home. And I think it's something that if I had not had those cheerleaders in my life, I'm not sure that I would have figured out how to do it on my own. But it's turned out to be a very successful venture.
Tell people what mitochondrial disease is, for those of you that don't know what it is.
Sure. It's a pretty big catch-all name for what the condition is. But basically, your mitochondria is the part of your cell that turns food into energy. It's the energy factory. Okay. Now, if you were to survey 100 different patients that had mitochondrial disease, you would hear 100 different experiences. The degree of severity, what is affected, it has to do with the ratio of good mitochondria to bad. And there are patients that they can tell you, based on the testing that they've had done, they can say exactly what's missing. There's a protein missing, and it does this. For my kids, we have done all the testing, but we have not been able to find where the genetic mutation is. So in practical terms, mitochondrial disease is a disease of energy. Anything that requires a lot of energy is at risk. So you will end up with large systems, development, speech, immune system. These are all things that require a lot of energy. So for my own kids, they deal with a lot of sleep disorders. Some of them have learning delays, speech delays, gastrointestinal things. There's just there's a wide gambit of possible symptoms, but energy is the common thread.
So all 4 of your children have this?
They do. We statistically, they told us after our first daughter was diagnosed that the odds of having another child with this condition are about 25%, about 1 in 4. So we're just batting 1,000. We ended up having the 1%. Is
it a hereditary disease?
It can be.
But you don't have it, right?
And we do not. And we couldn't find it on either side of our family. And so the theory, which I'm sure someday we'll be able to prove, but the theory is that with my kids, there's probably a mutation in the nucleus, which you could have, because you get your mitochondria from your mother. So in theory, if I've got 4 kids with mitochondrial disease, I should be able to trace it somewhere in my side of the family. And we haven't been able to. So there's some quirk in what they are dealing with. But there are definitely families that, yes, you can see in the family, looking back, that there have been signs and symptoms of this condition for generations.
With your 4 children, are there different degrees of severity with this disease? I mean, or they have different issues, different needs?
Yes, they really do. And I think that some of the reasoning why can be traced back to our learning curve as parents and caretakers. When my oldest was diagnosed, she was 9 months old, and she had been born prematurely, unrelated. And so a lot of what we looked at in the first 9 months, everybody thought was related to the prematurity, right? You would expect someone that was born early to be slightly behind. When she was 9 months old, she had a very sudden, they call it a decompensation. She crashed. She became infant-like overnight. Couldn't hold her head up, couldn't move her arms on her own, endless twitching, and she stopped sleeping. So we ended up in the hospital, and she actually got diagnosed rather quickly. There are people that struggle for years with symptoms before they can get diagnosis. She was in a bad enough state at that time that it was actually fairly easy to see in tests, and she was able to get diagnosed. So a lot of her current symptoms to this day come from that first crash and not ever having been able to fully recover. So she still has movement issues. She has delays because it took a long time for us to figure out how to get the calories that she was going to need. I mean, that's the big thing that you do if you have mitochondrial disease, is you push calories. You make sure that they have enough energy. If their body's not using it efficiently, you got to make sure there's a surplus. And it took us a long time to figure that out. With our kids since then, and maybe, this is probably true of people that don't deal with a medical condition, you always do all your trial and error on your first kid, right? You figure out everything that you know and that you don't know on the first one. And with our other children, when we started to see the early signs of a decompensation, when we started to see the early signs of struggling to eat or having a developmental struggle, we were able to address it very quickly. So they didn't have the major crashes that my eldest did just because we knew more. So at this point, there is a variability. And even if you were to have asked me this question, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, our day-to-day life looks quite a bit different because we've been blessed with them getting older. And that's changed a lot of how we live with the disease.
So how old are your children now?
So my oldest is 13. Her sister is 12. And then I have an 8-year-old boy and a almost 6-year-old girl.
Okay. The way you described it, I don't know, I'm picturing hypoglycemia, but it's not that, right?
It's not, although I bet there's some similarities in what it looks like from the outside. What we tend to see if I'm watching, just in our day-to-day life, if I'm watching one of the kids really have an energy crash, for mine, they get deep, dark circles under their eyes. Their movements get clumsier. They have a hard time gripping onto things, a hard time not tripping and falling if they're walking across the floor. Sometimes it's a mood thing like you would see with any other kid when they get tired. They kind of fall apart, They need a lot more sleep than other kids, so they go to bed pretty early. They rest in the middle of the day. And that's probably not something that they will ever outgrow. My oldest two are tube-fed, and they also eat by mouth. So if you were just to meet them, if we had the privilege of meeting you in a grocery store, you probably would not know off the bat that they're dealing with something. They look pretty normal. There's an ebb and flow of energy throughout the day, and we plan for exertions. If we want to go do a thing, if we want to go play in the park, or if we want to go swimming in the summertime, we rest up for days in advance so that we can do that.
Wow, okay. How did you fare during I think the virus is kind of on the winding down side now, but were you locked in April,
We
May?
were mostly just because of where we lived. It was, we moved to King County, I think a week before it all shut down. So, being one of the quote-unquote vulnerable during this pandemic has been sort of interesting, because there's a lot of talk about the things that we're willing to do for the vulnerable, but there's not really a lot of time asking the vulnerable what helps us, Because immunity is an issue for my family. We have had seasons in our lives that we had to stay isolated during cold and flu season, that we have worn masks before they were cool. But what we've learned over time is that really our best, safest life is when all the healthy people around us are out getting sick and getting better. We need our cashiers and doctors and librarians to have healthy immune systems. It makes our world safer.
Yes, and that it does. I was going to say that the Pacific Northwest was sort of the beginning, the public beginning anyways. There's speculation that this virus actually started much earlier than when most people heard about it. But the first time that most people in the United States heard about it was that health care center, the senior home in Kirkland?
In King County, yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, that virus just went ravaged through that place. It seemed like it killed almost everybody, which was a real shame.
Yeah, it was a bad one.
Did they ever figure out how it got there?
The last I had heard, of course, I feel like there's so much information coming in and out, so I probably shouldn't be quoted. I thought they pinned it to a flight that he'd been out of the country and got traced that way, but I don't know.
Somebody came to visit the place, perhaps, or
Yeah, or had a connection to someone that worked there. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah. You've got a book called Olive. It's out now, right? It's available?
It is, yes.
Okay, tell us a little about the book.
Right, so you've heard about my kids now, so it's probably not a leap. It's fiction, but it tells the story of the world through the eyes of this nonverbal, medically fragile girl. You only know what she knows. So it was a really fun story to write for me because people have been telling me for years, you ought to write a book. And I used to think that it meant that they saw some great potential for writing or storytelling in me. And I finally figured out that really it was sort of code for your life is a little bit overwhelming to me. I would like to ease out of this conversation. But writing it as fiction gives the freedom to only see things from Olive's perspective. You don't know what her disease is because she doesn't know what her disease is. She doesn't view it as a disease. She views it as her life. This is what her limbs feel like. This is what her day-to-day living feels like. These are the players in her world. And I think that it makes it a riveting story anytime that we get to step into someone else's shoes like that.
So what does she do? What is the adventure of Olive?
Yeah, well, I would say that there are two big adventures that we go on with her. The first is that she gets a feeding tube. So we get to experience medical treatments from her perspective, what it feels like to be experiencing pain and the unknown and not have the words to have anyone understand you, to not be able to say, I'm scared, to not be able to say, that hurts and I'd like that to stop. So it begins there, and that's obviously, it's a very isolating experience to find that you are somewhat trapped in your own body and can't communicate what you want said. But partway through the book, she has a younger sister. And over time, they realize that the younger sister, whatever is wrong with Olive, is also wrong with her younger sister. And she finds one person that understands her. They develop a twin language. They're able to have a camaraderie. And she learns that sometimes all it takes is one person understanding you for you to be okay, for it to change your world. And so you get to sort of go on the adventure of the ordinary with her, the ordinary of her day-to-day life.
You mentioned feeding tubes. Is that, I'm trying to picture that. Is that where it goes in your throat?
So the kind that is in the book is actually
an IV.
It actually goes directly into your stomach. So there's surgically a hole put in, and there's a little flip top. You attach a tube to this little flip top that is actually on your belly, and so food can be put through syringe, through formulas, directly into the stomach.
Would she not be capable to eat normally? Or why would you do that? In
the story, she describes fatigue, that the fatigue of eating is so great that food would just fall out of her mouth. So even though she wouldn't breathe in the food or anything, it wasn't so much that she wasn't safe, but more just that she was too tired. Her body moves in ways that she can't control, so she has a difficult time bringing food up to her mouth, and once it's there, the fatigue is so overwhelming that it's difficult to swallow. So when she gets the surgery to have this feeding tube, we go with her on this journey of just what a terrifying experience, right? To be waking up and suddenly you have this tube attached to your stomach. But she quickly discovers that she now has the energy to try things there. And the big one for her is walking. She becomes completely determined to learn how to walk.
I don't mean to make a joke of this, but the idea of being too tired to eat is something that's a completely foreign concept to me.
I think it's foreign to most people. I think that's part of the appeal of the book, is to see something that is not relatable to most of us.
I could eat in my sleep, I think. Which is probably why I'm on radio.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
You'd be a very successful Mito kid.
Well, listen, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your story. You've got your hands full. Do you have help at all? Or do you take care of all those kids on your own?
I take care of them on my own. My husband is he's a farmer, and so we do this together.
Wow. Okay.
And it's an exciting life. It's not the one that I think I ever anticipated, but it's full.
Yeah.
It's a good, full life. And I think that if there was a message that I would want people to get from the book, it's that your life does not have to be normal to be good.
Well, and it's also not always what you expected it to be. You grow up with this idea of, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And then you get to a point and you say, well, maybe that wasn't it. So you go on and do something else. I mean, not everybody. Some people, I've seen some people who just wrote down what they were going to do at 5 years old and they did it. So, kudos to them. But a lot of people, it takes them a long time to find their way. It took me till I was 45 before I finally figured out. But the thing was, I was on the right road and then I deviated. So it took me to 45 to come back, I should say. I started out going the right way, but, then life just threw a curveball.
That's exactly I would say that's the story that I've had my whole life. The picture that I thought was going to happen, it didn't quite turn out that way. It can turn out better. You can end up in a better spot than what you had planned for yourself.
Yeah, it can turn out better. Okay, well, Barb, thanks so much for coming on. My guest is Barb Braendlein. Did I say that right?
You did.
Okay.
It was my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
And quickly before you go, give people your website so they can come check you out.
Sure. It's www.barbarabraendlein.com. Barbara. The last name is Braendlein.
Okay, super.
And basically, if you can read, there's no way that you will have sounded out this name. So, wise that we spelled it.
I'm guessing that's a German descent, yeah?
You are correct. Someone told me that it means little brands, like the branding of cattle, a small brand. So I was told.
Okay. Thanks again for coming on. This was fun talking to you. Best of luck with everything you're doing.